Wysteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to the fairies of Britanny. However, this is Merlin. I'm not sure Merlin is classed as a fairy, more a magician, but is in the fairy section, which is interesting. Merlin is a very different character. It's probable that the story of his love for Vivian was composed at a comparatively late date for the purpose of rounding off his fate in Arthurian legend. Yes, there is a story of Merlin and Vivian. Maybe I will tell it another time. A recent hypothesis concerning him to the effect that if he belongs to the pagan period of Celtic lore at all, he was probably the ideal magician or god of magicians. Canon McCullough smiles at the late Sir John Rye's belief that Merlin was a Celtic Zeus, but his later suggestion seems equally debatable. We must remember that we draw our conception of Merlin as Arthurian archmagus, chiefly from late Norman French sources and Celtic tradition. Ancient Brythonic traditions concerning beings of much the same type as Merlin appear to have existed at least, however, and the character of Leloken is the life of Saint Kentigern recalls his life story. So far research on the subject seems to show that the legend of Merlin is a thing of complex growth, composed of traditions of independent and widely differing origin, most of which were told about Celtic bards and soothsayers. Merlin is, in fact, the typical druid or wise man of Celtic tradition, and there is not the slightest reason for believing that he was ever paid divine honours. As a soothsayer of legend, he would assuredly belong to the pagan period. However, much he is indebted to Geoffrey of, I think it's, I'm not sure how to pronounce this bit, guys. Monmouth is late popularity in pure romance. Monmouth, I think. Monmouth, Geoffrey of Monmouth. That's new to me. The Fountain of Barathon. So, the magic fountain of Barathon, sequestered among hills and surrounded by deep woods, says a 13th century writer of the fountain. Oh, amazing wonder of fountain of Brazilian! If a drop be taken and poured on a certain rock beside the spring, immediately the water changes into vapour, forms itself into great clouds filled with hail, and hair becomes thick with shadows, and resonant with the muttering of thunder. Those who have come through curiosity to behold the prodigy wish that they have never done so. So filled on their hearts with terror, and so despair paralyze their limbs. Incredible as the marvel may seem, yet the proofs of its reality are too abundant to be doubted. Juan de Mire was more fortunate than Wace. He sprinkled the magic stone which lay behind the fountain with water from the golden basin, and hung from the oak that shaded it, and beheld many marvels. And so may he who has a seeing eye, even today. There is a poem. Ah, how remote, forlorn, sounded the sad, sweet horn. In forest gloom enchanted, I saw the shadows of kings go riding by, but cerements mingled and paled with their panoply, and the moss ways deadened the steps of steeds that never panted. Ah, what had fantasy in that sound to say, sad as a spirit's wailing, a call from over the seas of Shadowland, a call the soul of soul might understand, but never, never the mind, the steeps of soul assailing. And that is the poem. It's an interesting one, and it's interesting how it just sort of stops dead. And usually you find that poems stop with an impact, right? There's a certain, you can tell when a poem has ended. That one you cannot. You think it's going to carry on. Interesting. Bruno of La Montagne. The old fragmentary romance of Bruno of La Montagne is eloquent of the fairy spirit, which informs all Breton lore. Bouteau, Baron of La Montagne, had married a young lady when he himself of mature years, and had a son whom he resolved to take to a fountain where the fairies came to repose themselves. The Baron, describing this magic well to the child's mother, says, and it's a rough translation of what he would have said back then, some believe 'tis in Champagne, and others by the rock Griffin, but chance it is in Aluminier, or Bacillin de la Montagne. Some even think that it is in Spain, or where sleeps Artus of Britanny. The Signor gave his infant son into the keeping of Briant, a trusty friend of his, and he set out for the fairy fountain with a troop of vassals. They left the infant in the forest of Broceliande. Here the fairies soon found him. "Ah, sisters," said one, whose skin was as white as a robe of gossamer she wore, and whose golden crown betokened her the queen of the others, "come hither and see a new-born infant. How, I wonder, does he come to be here? I am sure I did not behold him in this spot yesterday. Well, at all events, he must be baptized and suitably endowed, as in our custom when we discover a mortal child. Now, what will you give him?" "I will give him," said one, "beauty and grace." "I endow him," said a second, "with generosity." "And I," said the third, "with such valour that he will overthrow all his enemy at tourney and on the battlefield." The queen listened to these promises. "Surely you have little sense," she said. "For my part, I wish that in his youth he may love one who will be utterly insensible to him, and although he will be as you desire, noble, generous, beautiful, and valorous, he will yet, for his good, suffer keenly from the anguish of love." "Oh, queen," said one of the fairies, "what a cruel fate you have ordained for this unfortunate child! But I myself shall watch over him, and nurse him until he comes to such an age as he may love, when I myself will try and engage his affections." "For all that," said the queen, "I will not alter my design. You shall not nurse the infant." The fairies then disappeared. Shortly afterwards, Briant returned, and carried the child back to the castle of Le Montagne, where presently a fairy presented herself as a nurse. Unfortunately, the manuscript from which this tale is sort of come from, it takes breaks off points, and we do not know if the fairy queen did succeed in her plans. There is unfortunately not enough to tell the rest of the tale, but it is an insight into a very good story. A story that I think has been retold and is now called something quite different. I mean, look at when Cinderella comes into light, Sleeping Beauty. They all have fairies in them, right? Think about that, and think about Sleeping Beauty, how she's given the wishes from the fairies. Is that not very similar to that? Because I think it is very similar indeed. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.
Wysteria, energy, twister.